This is the Research Room. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Robert Parker of American Football Stories. And today we're going to look into the two defensive tackle transfers that Florida has used to beef up their defensive front heading into the 2021 season. Rob, we're going to focus this episode on Antonio Shelton, the graduate transfer from Penn State, and DaQuan Newkirk out of Auburn. What are you looking forward to when you see these guys coming in 2021?
Two big hogs up the middle to clog up the defense. We know as Florida fans, Nick, last year wasn't too pretty on the defense side of the ball. Throughout the course of the year, Florida gave up, roughly 30 points per game. So hopefully with these two graduate transfers coming over to be stout, on the front four could definitely help up the back end and the secondary. So I'm definitely looking forward to these guys, playing early and often. And that's what Dan Mullen does. He brings in these guys throughout the transfer portal, and we see how they've panned out over the course of his career since he's been there.
Yeah, not just one, but two in a position of great need. You're losing Kyrie Campbell and Daryl Slayton off of last year's roster. And really, they're coming in to solidify a front that includes the most exciting prospect is sophomore Gervon Dexter, who we got to see a little bit of in 2020. But really, people are hoping he makes that jump in 2021. Having a couple running mates like Shelton and Newkirk could help Dexter really take that next step, Rob.
Yeah, it really could. I tell you what, it wouldn't surprise me if Gervon Dexter ultimately becomes a starter towards the end of the year. But having these two veteran guys up front is going to give him that time to grow and develop over the course of the year. And just having those, fifth-year graduate seniors in the defensive tackle room is just going to be leadership and experience, and that's what they're bringing to the front four as graduate transfers.
Well, particularly the leadership angle you talk about. Antonio Shelton was revered at Penn State. I mean, you see all types of clips of him having the team around, pumping them up before games. James Franklin was a big Shelton fan, said he did a lot, for the team. And the coaching staff. Really was a good communicator, it sounded like. But he's 6'2", 327 pounds. He's on his sixth year of eligibility. Grad transfer, defensive tackle from Penn State. Originally from Columbus, Ohio. Overlooked by the Buckeyes as a three-star recruit out of Westerville North in Columbus, Ohio. Chose Penn State over Illinois, Rutgers, Cincinnati, and Iowa State as a three-star prospect, according to 24/7 Sports. He saw playing time throughout his career, but it really picked up toward the end. He played 40 games overall for the Lions, Rob. Started 20 of them, last year being his marquee season where he had a career high 3.5 sacks in 2020.
Yeah, I tell you what, coming into the SEC definitely won't be a deer in headlights. He's played in the Big Ten. He's been on big stages. He's been in big stadiums and arenas. So I tell you what, the SEC, it won't be too overwhelming for, Shelton coming in as a grad transfer. If anything, that experience that he garnered at Penn State is just going to carry over to the Swamp. So I'm definitely excited to see what he brings to the table this year.
What have you seen from Shelton on tape in terms of projecting to the next level? It seems like he's got a quickness about him, but he's not gonna. He doesn't show up on the stat sheet a whole lot. Like he's got some numbers here or there, but he seems like a guy that's just going to clog things up. He might not be making the tackle, but he might prove valuable for guys like Ventrell Miller up the middle.
Most definitely. I tell you what, I just like to reference an episode we had on American Football Stories, earlier in our pod with Jordan Scott, nose tackle out of Oregon that eventually went undrafted to the Minnesota Vikings. And we actually had a conversation about, the defensive tackle, the big uglies up front, just taking on the double teams and freeing the linebackers to run sideline for sideline. But not only will it, Shelton and Dunkirk coming over to free up the linebackers, it's going to free up those guys on the outside and Brenton Cox and Jeremiah Moon and Zachary Carter to lead the way and just get pressure on the quarterback. So I think this is a big acquisition, another transfer portal guy that, Dan Mullen has hit on since he's been there at the Gainesville.
Yeah, so this guy might not be the star. Might not necessarily be a star player, but if he stays healthy, we're looking at a real solid contributor coming in on the defensive front.
Yeah, a very solid contributor. Should be day one starter, just like you said, barring any health injury scares. And I can just see him just, being a leader with the younger guys that we have in the defensive tackle room. And, just taking on the double teams within the SEC. We know in the SEC to win games, you have to win in the trenches. And that's something that Dan Mullen recognizes. And that's something that he understands by bringing in these two grad transfers, especially with the loss, just like you mentioned earlier, Nick, with Slayton and Dunlap and Kyrie Campbell.
Let's move on to DaQuan Newkirk. When you see a coaching change these days, you're going to see a flood of guys leave the program. Auburn certainly experienced that. You see, I think Big Cat Bryant ended up in UCF with Gus Malzahn, if I'm not mistaken. But his fellow running mate along the defensive line here, DaQuan Newkirk, comes back closer to home from Auburn. He's an Orlando native. He played at the First Academy in Orlando after 3 years at Auburn. Also did a stint at Mississippi Gulf Coast, a community college. And he really had some incredibly impressive numbers there. He has his one stellar year in JUCO consisted of 45 tackles, 9 tackles for a loss, Rob, before he got to Auburn. But then once he got to Auburn, he had back-to-back Achilles injuries, and that really killed his time early on. However, gets back on the field last year, 6'3", 317 pounds, starts every regular season game for the Tigers in 2020. And it was his most productive season. He ends up getting 28 tackles and 1.5 sacks for the Tigers.
Yeah, I mean, he had an outstanding season, compared to his career so far last season. Just like you said, he got plagued with the injury bug when he made the transition from the JUCO level. And once again, that's something that you have to worry about in SEC play with the physicality and everything. And I think that's why Dan Mullen has did a great job by tapping into the transfer portal, not only adding players that can play right away, but also adding depth pieces. I expect, Shelton and Newkirk to, step in and play right away. But it also gives depth to that front four that's kind of going to have some losses after, Dunlap and Kyrie Campbell and Slayton has left town. But I tell you what, this guy was a running back in high school. So I know he's beefed up a lot since those days in high school. But this is a guy, if you just watch his film, a guy that can stop the run and rush the passer. So that's going to be something key on the defensive line moving forward for the 2021 season. So I just think these two acquisitions that Dan Mullen has picked up in the transfer portal is going to play exceptionally well throughout the year. And it's also going to give Gervon Dexter a chance to kind of develop slowly throughout the season.
A lot of guys at this level, their high school film is pretty incredible, but Newkirk's is something else. I mean, this was a 260-pound running back. But even along the defensive line, he's picking off balls on screens and everything. The guy is a freak athlete, a running back skill set who bulked up to play defensive lineman, so that if he stays healthy, I mean, that's been his biggest issue throughout his collegiate career. But this extra year with COVID is being a COVID senior, basically. I don't know what the official term, what we're calling that these days, but this extra years could really benefit him. And I mean, Newkirk, I look at that with the size and the athleticism. This looks to be, assuming you stay healthy again, a surefire NFL pick next year in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I mean, he's waited his turn, just like you said. He was on that front four with Big Cat Bryant and, Brown, who also actually went on to the NFL. So he's been behind some big-time players on that defensive line, and now he's finally getting that opportunity to showcase his talents. And I think he's going to do exceptionally well, just like you said. If he can stay health and injury-free, I think he has an exceptional season. If it doesn't show up in the stat sheet, it would definitely show up within that defensive tackle room, because he's going to be garnering the double teams. He's going to be making those chase down runs on, from sideline to sideline. He's going to be getting those hands on those balls. So I tell you what, he's going to be an amazing player for the scheme that Florida is trying to run on the defense side of things.
And though there was struggle throughout last year, really across the ball on defense, and you could say it starts up front, adding Shelton and Newkirk to the mix with Cox, Carter, Moon, Bogle, Dexter, Chatfield, just to name a few in that room, that rotation, these guys are going to be fresh game in and game out. There's going to be plenty of snaps for each of these guys. And really, the thing we really like to see, look at all that senior experience around a guy like Gervon Dexter. I think that's going to be huge for his development. And I mean, we haven't seen Bogle break out yet. Chatfield's had a couple nice moments, and Cox too. Cox really, he's had some good moments, but he hasn't put together that consistent play time in, time out. And these guys, adding these guys to the defensive front, can't hurt. It can't hurt at all. And really, I the more I look into this defense, I know everybody's down on the defense right now. I'm not trying to be overly optimistic or just delusional fan with the orange and blue glasses right now. But you got to think it can't get worse than it was last year. And you look at these two pieces in particular, if you picked a position where we could use two solid transfers in, it would be at this position here, Rob. So I think this defensive tackle, nose tackle position, I think the Gators crushed it with picking up these two transfers, and I'm really excited to see how they can impact the defense in 2021.
Yeah, just like you said, Nick, we know the defense struggled last year, just like I mentioned earlier, giving up, roughly 31 points a game. But the defense actually led the SEC in sacks, picking up, 3 a game. And I tell you what, just like you mentioned, you said it can't get no worse from last year. It can only get better. And I think it will get better. So if you're averaging 3 sacks per game on a defense that was kind of, shiesty last year, I expect, that number to go up to anywhere from, maybe 5 sacks a game. So I tell you what, and that's
a lot.
that's just the presence that these two interior defenders can have, especially if they're taking on double teams and freeing up those outside guys. And I think Brenton Cox, another 5-star that Dan Mullen got in the transfer portal, I think he has his breakout year this year. So if he can have that single coverage on the outside, I think he can get to the quarterback, and that's what Dan Mullen brought him on board for.
Yeah, assuming this front stays healthy, it's certainly looking formidable. However, you got a guy that the upside with Newkirk could be that he works his way up into maybe a 2nd or 3rd round draft pick status. The downside is you got a guy who's dealt with a lot of injuries throughout his career. So a little bit of a roll of the dice, but good pickup for Mullen, good pickup for the staff. And I think it's a good risk that they're taking on both Newkirk and Shelton. Rob, you got any final thoughts before we send it out?
I just want to go back and just harp on Dan Mullen, getting these hidden gems within the 5-star transfer portal. We've seen, we had the episode prior to this on the research room analyzing and breaking down DeMarcus Bowman. Arik Gilbert, the highly touted transfer portal guy from LSU, the tight end, was in the mix coming to Florida, but we know how that ended up going. But, you had Trayvon Grimes, you had Jonathan Grenard, you have another 5-star on the roster, Lorenzo Lingard, and Brenton Cox we mentioned earlier. So Dan Mullen is using the transfer portal like it should be used, and I think he's doing a good job of not only just getting players through the transfer portal to fill spots and add depth, he's actually getting players that can actually come in and have an immediate impact right away. So I take my hats off to Dan Mullen and that coaching staff, and hopefully Florida can, go back to being, really, really dominant on the defense side of the ball like we saw, within the last couple of years outside of last year.
Yeah, and to your point, Rob, this isn't with Shelton and Newkirk. This is not just you're taking transfers and kind of plugging them in and hoping that they work. These are proven guys from big time schools that have shown they could play on the field at this level. So this is not a I think of the early days of the transfer portal where you get Malik Zaire coming in, just like, man, I hope that works out. Like where this isn't like a shot and a prayer where you're kind of hoping it works out. This totally makes sense for the roster. It makes sense for the rotation. It's a position of need. You don't really need to bring in 2 defensive ends. We need to help up the middle. I mean, it fits perfectly. It makes a ton of sense. I know even when we were talking about doing this episode, we were talking about let's do one on Dexter, but Dexter's getting a ton of attention already. Everyone knows about Dexter, 5-star kid. I mean, looks like he's going to be a freak. I absolutely cannot wait to see him develop in year 2. But part of his development could be these grad transfers that Mullen, even though we're missing some on the front end of the recruiting, the transfer portal has been a friend to Dan Mullen and the Florida Gators, to your point. And definitely looking forward to their impact in 2021. Hey, I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Robert Parker of American Football Stories. Be sure to check out the American Football Stories podcast along with readandreaction.com for more content. We're going to set it out. And thank you for listening to another episode of The Research Room.